Hello, George. Amazing to have you on my podcast today in person.
Pleasure to be here.
And you're an owner of the platform TheTinMen, which basically focuses on men's mental health and the way we combat violence against men, the way we analyze what's really happening. And my podcast is mostly political, but the reason I wanted to dive into these kind of topics specifically is because I hear a lot of conservative, labor, uh, all kinds of politicians talking about violence against women and girls, and it's being emphasized. And a lot of people are working on policies towards combating these things and preventing them from happening. And people are saying that the numbers are rising, and people are saying that it's an urgent issue that we need to urgently focus on in the organizations are working. But they never seem to mention that actually the manifestations of violence against men and boys might not be as cruel and as violent as they happen to be with violence against women and girls, but they're actually there.
I mean, what do you mean by cruel? I mean, I guess that's kind of a subjective term.
I usually tend to think that violence against women and girls, as men tend to have more strength, tend to, when they are violent, they tend to manifest that by punching people, by being overly aggressive. Women can manifest their violence in different and sort of more softer ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, violence against women and girls is a collective term for many different crimes, from sort of stranger violence on the streets to partner violence, family violence, sexual violence, stalking, sort of drug spiking, all these things. They're all considered violence against women and girls. There is no such thing as violence against men and boys, despite men and boys experiencing violent crime at higher rates than women, more or less across every single violent crime, apart from sexual crimes. I would disagree that one's more cruel than the other. I mean, every single one needs to be taken on an individual basis. Although it's true men do have greater physical strength, that doesn't always translate into the outcomes you're suggesting. In fact, recent data from the Office for National Statistics finds that male victims of abuse are more often injured than women, which is very counterintuitive to what you're saying. And I've also read sort of studies on street crime, where men are by far the biggest victim. And criminals that have been interviewed for those studies, they actually talk about having deep shame and remorse for the times where they did target a woman, which was normally because she was accompanying a man they were robbing. So I think, yeah, men are stronger than women, generally speaking, but I don't think that necessarily translates into what you're saying. I think a woman feels like she's punching up in that situation, so she's more likely to be putting full force into whatever she's doing, whereas a man would, as you say, pull their punch when they're hitting a woman. But it's certainly a lot more complicated than what the media suggests. Violence against women is always going to be a problem. Any amount of violence, any victim, even just one, is a problem worth talking about. Thankfully, the latest data has shown about 10% drop in homicide against women, so violence against women, femicide, and that's just last year. So it does go up and down. It's coming down currently, but men and boys remain the number one victim of almost all violent crimes, particularly crime on the street, particularly in London, knife crime, massive issue, rarely discussed at all, if ever. And when it comes to partner violence, domestic violence, men are about 40% of victims now. So it's gone up from 30% to 40% from the latest ONS stats. So a lot to be said, and not much of it being spoken about, apart from here.
I'm curious, why did you decide to start speaking out against that? Because many people, I feel like, in the society find that as a big problem, but maybe they don't have the courage to say what they really think in social media. They're afraid that certain information will flow around the media and then it's going to be used against them.
Yeah.
Has that ever happened to you, and why did you start speaking against it?
I just felt like someone ought to, so why not me? It started over lockdown when my life as a filmmaker sort of was put on pause. The film industry stopped. And I, as a creative, I felt like I wanted to create content on something, and there was a bunch of issues that I found were deeply misunderstood and unspoken about, around which there was a huge amount of evidence around what I'm discussing. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of papers on domestic violence that go directly against what you're saying, around one being more cruel than the other. And I was like, it just requires someone like me who's got a broad creative skill set, who's very persistent, and most importantly has thick skin, who's willing to play those cards. And 5 years later, here I am. It's going pretty well. It's not quite as dramatic as you might be suggesting. I don't get the hate mail, death threats like that. I mean, occasionally that sort of thing does happen, but it's certainly not a day-to-day thing for me. In fact, I'm inundated with kind words and support. And if someone's trying to find my home address, it's often to send me flowers or chocolates, and not poo or like throwing a brick from my window. But yeah, there are real risks. I don't use my full name. That's why I use TheTinMen. That's why I just go by George. And yeah, I think there are risks, but they're overblown. But these issues are extremely important. It all filters down to in my opinion, it all filters down to male suicide. That's the sort of common denominator beneath everything I talk about, such as experiences of violent crime. So domestic violence, 11% of men experiencing domestic violence in the UK will consider suicide. So I try to talk about suicide and how broad of a problem it is, and how it's not caused by one particular thing. So yeah, basically reducing male suicide, which is the greatest risk to your life and my life, and I assume all the men listening to this podcast, it's a massive issue. And thousands of men die every year from suicide in the UK, and they deserve to be spoken about. And any amount of fear I might feel is not as important as helping those men. So here I am.
After COVID, many prominent figures like Jordan Peterson appeared in the media, starting speaking out about men more. And it was a little bit a surprise, because before nobody really focused on that issue. We could see before COVID, feminism was on a tremendous rise, and most people certainly thought that the violence is exclusive to be directed against women and girls rather than men and boys. How do you think the situation has changed, and has the world acquired any role models from the after the COVID time? Or do men really have any role models?
I mean, yeah, I get asked that question all the time. I mean, I was a fan of Jordan Peterson. I mean, I am still a fan. I really appreciated a lot of the things he said around men and boys when he first came to sort of public prominence. I feel like he took a lot of heat for that, and has since left those conversation points behind, and to all our detriment.
Although
now,
his political takes are.
And now he's talking about geopolitics. He's talking about
completely
trans. Almost like, what do you know? He's talking about Ukraine. He's talking about religion. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but that's not what I subscribe to. So I'm not as interested in him as I formerly was. As well, role models. There are a few. People always ask me, who do you recommend as a role model for boys, men and boys, especially young men? And I just think, when I talk about role models, I'm not talking about like action heroes or podcasters, or I'm not going to give you a film recommendation. I'm talking about like fathers at homes, teachers, male sports coaches. I'm not looking for like an Andrew Tate sort of role model, although he is a horrendous role model for men and boys. I'm talking about normal men in houses and schools and in sort of colleges and sports teams that are just normal men, role models for boys, like dads, especially dads. And so few dads now at home, 1 in 4 boys growing up without any dad. So the role model is the father figure in that instance, not some celebrity.
And it's fascinating how somehow these kinds of people are not paid enough attention to. Even people who are on the verge of poverty but still managing to provide for their family. I find that incredible, especially as I'm from Ukraine, and luckily I've had an opportunity to at least study in a different country, to go out, find out what's the world like outside of my country. But some people do not get that opportunity, and some families are living in poverty, and some fathers have to find strength each day to wake up and provide to their families in the situation of war.
Yeah, well, Ukrainian men, fathers, are laying down their lives as we speak for their children, their families, and society in Ukraine and Europe. And I think that's often missed. I don't think we sort of lose sight of that, but it's still ongoing. And there's going to be a generation, sadly, of boys that are going to be growing up without their fathers in Ukraine because they've been lost to the war. Or they'll come back and they'll be forever sort of traumatized, I imagine. So it's a shame we have to wait for those things to happen before we realise how important fathers are and men in general are to families. I mean, obviously not as extreme, but the latest data in the UK is that a quarter of all schools have no male teachers whatsoever. So not one male teacher in 1/4 of all UK primary schools. About 80% of all teachers are female. Yeah, that goes up and up and up depending on how low you go, to the point of like kindergarten, preschool, it's like 95% women or more. So there's just a massive lack of positive male role models in the lives of boys. A boy who may not have a father at home, who'll go to school, there'll be no male teachers at school whatsoever. And then, turn on the TV and you're confronted with these really poor sort of doofus dads and TV sitcoms, or on advertising, or on TikTok. You just hear the most horrendous things said about men and boys. And then you got people gravitating towards Andrew Tate and the like, and it's totally unsurprising because there's no one else that's really speaking positively about masculinity apart from people like him, and arguably Jordan Peterson, although I guess, as we said, that's now past.
Now, in your opinion, how should we start this change? This is the interpretation probably you haven't heard much, but for me as a politician, as a person who's been working in politics, I tend to focus on policy. I tend to be interested in how we can actually contribute. So there are many ways in which we can raise awareness, talk about it on the podcast. Different organizations which are raising awareness. Movember, which you have mentioned in many of the podcasts you've done. But I tend to focus on real things that we can do. What do you think are, as a lot of policy is created to combat violence against women and girls, what can we do to combat violence against men and boys?
Well, I won't be looking to politicians, I'm afraid, to solve that one. I mean, politicians have betrayed men and boys in that sense, where there is no policy. Like they all say, violence against women and girls is the priority. And that's like quoted from the front page of their policy paper. And they're quite clear. They have very little interest in violence against men and boys. They'll only ever talk about violence by men and boys towards women and girls. And often we'll bury our head in the sand after every single month, like a young boy stabbed to death in this country, in London, like a teenage boy, and we'll do very little, if anything, about it, say nothing, until a young girl or woman is tragically impacted by knife crime, who remain, maybe 5 or 10% of all knife crime victims, and then suddenly everyone's out on their soapbox, politicians, Sadiq Khan's talking about his epidemic of violence against women and girls, and what can we do, and never said anything about the 9 in 10 victims of teen knife crime who are male, typically young black boys. No one ever says anything because it's not a vote winner. And like my most pessimistic view of politicians is that they really don't care about anything they talk about. All they care about is getting that tick in the box on a ballot paper next to their name, and they'll say whatever they need to get you to vote for them. Whether they actually enact these policies is really down to them. But advocating for men and boys is not a vote winner. Advocating for women and girls certainly is, on the left particularly. So that's what they'll do. And they'll never say anything about violence against men and boys because so few people want to vote for it or even understand what these issues are. So I'm not waiting for Westminster, and we can't afford to. I find politicians kind of gutless in that sense. No comment on you, of course. But the solution for violence against men and boys comes at a grassroots level, and I think we need to be opening up more leisure centres, more youth clubs, more sports centres, more boxing societies, giving places for these young men and boys to go so they don't turn to a life of crime, don't pick up the knife and join a gang. They'll go to a boxing society. I know so many amazing boxing gyms in London that bring in these boys, and God knows how many crimes and deaths they might have prevented by giving them somewhere better to go, because that is what ultimately a gang is. A gang is a family. A boy who often hasn't got a dad at home will go looking for family and belonging, purpose elsewhere, and often that's a gang. So if we can find a place for him to go instead, such as like the clubs and leisure centres and libraries, political societies, debate clubs that I'm talking about, I think that will have a massive positive impact, and we'll let the politicians do the politics, and they can do that elsewhere. So yeah, I think grassroots social intervention, social prescription, social groups, not just for like reducing crime, but just helping with mental health, like loneliness especially.
But I find that extremely frustrating that it's so hard to get this point that we care about men and boys to politicians across. As you mentioned, Sadiq Khan, I've gone to London. I've talked to London Assembly members. I've gone to City Hall. Mostly those on the conservative side, and they tend to focus on violence, combating violence against women and girls, and not a single thing was mentioned about men and boys.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem here is not that they're focusing on women and girls, because that needs to be done. And they're saying that the statistics is rising and that needs to be done. But I have a problem with how hard is it to get our point across, because even when I'm talking to politicians and saying, I have to phrase it in a way that, yes, I do care about that issue, but I also, please pay attention to this. Well, it's self-evident that person like me, like you would care about violence against women and girls. And I should freely be able to get my point across, and they should hear me without me mentioning once again that I'm very democratic. I'm pro this. Don't misconstrue my words.
Yeah, it's always that the dance we're always dancing in this area is that we're constantly trying to talk about men and boys in their own right, whilst also not giving the impression of diminishing what's happening to women and girls. And I get so frustrated having to constantly do the throat clearing and penance paying and kissing the ring of feminism to say, yes, of course we care about women and girls, and their X is important and Y is important, and we're not trying to say like all these apologies you have to give prospectively before you can even get to the point you want to make. I've just stopped doing that now. I feel like it's self-evident. I am not pro-violence against women and girls. I'm just anti-violence against everyone. I don't think anyone should live in a life of violence or be subjected to violence. Whether you're a woman, a man, girl, boy, it's immaterial in many ways. I just don't want anyone to experience violence. And often, because of the nature of violence and the fact that especially family violence and domestic and intimate partner violence, it's a cycle of violence. It's not like a one-off thing when you're walking down the street and someone might assault you. These are cycles of violence that escalate and escalate and escalate. So maybe, an argument becomes shouting, and then shouting becomes shoving, and shoving becomes slapping, and slapping becomes punching, and then suddenly it gets to what you described earlier. The important thing is to break that cycle, and you can't solve any equation from both sides. So by denying men and boys, denying the existence of violence against men and boys, you're only leaving women open to violence too. You're not breaking that cycle. You're not reducing violence, which is why it's not coming down, because you've got to look at both sides of the coin. You've got to treat both the equation from both sides, otherwise you're wasting your time. So I would argue that by reducing violence against men and boys, you are inadvertently, indirectly reducing violence against women and girls too. And not to mention, you're also reducing violence by women in same-sex relationships, where lesbian relationships have notoriously high intimate partner violence rates. So you're also helping them. And I just want to get out of this very ideological, one-sided, inaccurate, outdated view of violence that doesn't help anyone and only causes more and more divisions and more apologies and more just kowtowing in the way you described. So it's a difficult subject to talk about for sure. I try to be assertive and confident in what I'm saying, but without being apologetic. But I also don't want to diminish what women and girls are experiencing either. So it's a balancing act for sure.
Which society do you think we live in right now? How is the balance? Because for a long time, feminists have been trying to push the balance of patriarchy back towards the center. And now the whole figures of Jordan Peterson and others were so popular because they felt like, I would say reasonably, like this balance has been not only pushed to the center, but has been a little bit pushed to the side of women now. And now they're trying to bring it back. Where do you think we can find the balance? And are we on the right track in this regard?
In what, into what, how we value men and women in society?
What's our society is like?
Well, people often will say we're living in a patriarchy, and I don't think we are. Certainly not today, and not in the UK. I mean, if you look at that term, if you break it down, it means father, ruler. So patri means father, archy means ruler, father, ruler. It means the father is the ruler of the family. And it's just not true. Like we just said, like 1/4 of families don't even have a father. Fathers don't even have equal rights in this country. They're not treated with equal respect. They're treated as babysitters. They're treated as paedophiles. They're treated as inept doofus dads. They literally don't have equal rights. So how could that man be the ruler? He's not even here. Like in 1/4 of families, he's gone. So he's a strange ruler when he doesn't even have rights to things that matter most to him. Like how does that make any sense? And the amount of fathers I've seen in my life deprived of children, which I imagine is the most important thing to any parent, to lose the thing that's most important to you as a result of not having equal rights, that you're not a ruler of anything. You can't even hold on to the thing that matters most to you. So this worldview that assumes and insists that fathers are the ruler of the family and we live in a patriarchy is nonsense. That's not to say it doesn't exist in other parts of the world, and it does not to say it hasn't existed in this country in the past, but it doesn't exist now, and suggesting that it does erases the many areas where men and boys are behind, such as ones you discussed, but many more we haven't. And it leads again to a one-sided conversation that just leads to more and more division, more and more dislike, disdain between men and women, more and more men killing themselves, and like a fundamental political difference that's growing and growing and growing. And we're all feeling that. So I don't think we live in a patriarchy. I don't think we live in a matriarchy. I think we live in a very complicated world that can't be summarised by a catchphrase or a hashtag, no matter how much we try to find one.
It is very interesting that you mention what each parent tends to get after the divorce in courts. As I've been very interested on this topic too for a very long time. As we're moving on in the society from this perception as men should do this, women should do that, feminists and all of the people basically trying to dismiss those points, saying that they are not really valid because different people tend to like different things, and there are women who would like to do engineering and men who would like to babysit their children. And fair enough. But at the same time, in courts, I would still say that most women are perceived as just naturally better people to take care of the babies. And that is mostly the reason. Of course, there are other reasons why men sometimes do not get the custody of the children. But sometimes it's just the perception of women being better caregivers that gives them the opportunity to take the children. And this will leave men, fathers, alienated from their children.
I mean, of course there is no one type of woman or one type of man. Some men are better parents, some women want to be engineers. That's important too, but then at the same time there are such things as male typical behaviours, and they're not entirely socially created. And male interests are often different to women, but they overlap, and we're talking on average here, because obviously, like I said, there's many different types of women. But yeah, what I'm asking for, I'm not trying to say any parent's better than the other. I just want a father and mother who are going for a custody battle to enter that court on a level playing field, where they're not judged on the basis of their sex. They're just seen as, we're presuming you're both equally good parents, and within this court case, we're going to actually find out who is actually more capable and better suited to provide for this child. That doesn't happen. Like you said, we naturally seem to think women are better parents. That's written in law. So, I mean, the Children Act, which basically governs who gets parental responsibility. So when I say parental responsibility, I mean parental rights. That's what we call them in the UK. Parental responsibility is given to mothers in every single instance. So, single, divorced, separated, married, she'll have complete parental responsibility to her child without question, which is quite right. The father has to be married, or he has to be named on the birth certificate. If he hasn't got those two things, he's not got parental responsibility, and he is by law a second-class parent. And she can do whatever she wants. She can take the child away, she can move school, she can change his name, her name, pick the religion, you can put it up for adoption. She's got control. He hasn't, unless he's married or unless he's named on the birth certificate. Problem is, The mother can decide not to do those things. You can not name him, or you can not marry him. And it's not right that a man has to marry into the rights for his child. Like when women had to do that, we consider that the patriarchy, which is fair enough. But why should a man have to marry into the rights for his own child? Like, he should be given the same equal rights as the mother. And like, I'm tired of demanding fathers take equal responsibility for their children, which is fair enough, but then at the same time not giving them equal rights. Because rights and responsibility are literally two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. So as much as I am for equal responsibility from fathers, I am equally for equal rights as well. Because I just don't think you can have one without the other, not to mention also equal respect. So that's the sort of world I want to see where we champion both types of parent in their own right and equally valuable in different ways and equally essential to the raising of happy and healthy children. Yeah.
What do you think are the main problems that men are facing nowadays that cause them to commit suicides?
I mean, loneliness is a massive issue. I mean, there's so many. I don't consider suicide to be a single issue or single phenomenon whatsoever. I consider it to be the sum total culmination and combination of many different issues, such as child custody, that push men to suicide. So 1 in 5 suicides in the UK has been linked to child custody battles and relationship breakdown. So if there's 4,000 suicides, if 20% of that, we can bring down like suicide in a massive way if we can look at family courts and child custody. So I don't think male suicide is primarily a mental health problem. I don't think it can be fixed through some sort of medication. I don't think it's some sort of chemical imbalance inside of a man's brain. I don't think he's toxic or disaffective or like problematic and needs fixing. I think he's going through real life things that he doesn't think he can solve. So suicide becomes like a solution-based outcome, I've seen it described as. So the biggest problem, I think, is too many men have taken their lives. And on top of that is our complete inability and unwillingness to understand why men are doing it at such alarmingly high rates, as we all know, 3 or 4 times higher than women. I think loneliness is a massive issue. That is complicated in its own right. But I guess the thin end of the wedge, the iceberg above the water, is male suicide. But I really, really want to look beneath the water now, beneath the surface, and find out what's actually happening, what are the male experiences that are pushing so many men to these tragic outcomes. And stop insisting that it's a one-word answer, aka it's toxic masculinity that's doing it, because it's just not true.
Let's move to something more specific.
Sure.
Especially one of the things that you have focused on in many of your speeches, many of the things that is being put on social media is Movember.
Oh, okay.
And you've been very outspoken against it. And to be honest, I don't know much about Movember. I've looked into it before our podcast, but previously, I didn't know much about it.
Originally, Movember started off as a meme. You'd grow a moustache, or try to, in my case, in November to raise awareness around male suicide and male health.
Is that the whole idea?
Yeah, that's how it started off. And you grow a moustache and you'd show you're at least representing and showing an awareness of men's health, and you'd raise money, maybe £1,000. Then what came from that is a big charity from Australia that's now come to the UK and America and Canada, everywhere else. It's massive, the biggest men's health charity on the planet, Movember. People don't think there's two. People just think it's the meme, but it's actually now a massive charity that's underpinning it. So the money doesn't just go to generic men's health, it goes to Movember. They're a massive charity. They do lots of things. Some of them are really, really good. Some of them less good. I've had certainly a lot of good things to say about them, but assuming we're going to talk about the less than good, the problem is they have too much money, too much power and influence. A lot of people that have real concerns about Movember and how they spend or don't spend the money, the way they run, the sort of political ideas they buy into. They've donated a lot of money to violence against women, for example, which blows my mind considering there is no money going to violence against men and boys.
But that's not their... that shouldn't be their focus, right?
They're a men's health charity. They're a male suicide charity.
So how is the money going to...
violence against women and girls? And politics. Because of politics. Because it looks good. It looks good to be handing a big wedge of cash over to a violence against women charity and shaking their hand and posing for a photo. You'll get more donations, you'll get more votes. But it requires more bravery to hand that money to the men the men's shelters that don't even exist and desperate for the cash. But yeah, it's not popular. You might not get as big a round of applause. You won't get that big golden handshake. But I would argue it does more good, even more good than giving it to Vogue. And like I said, there is no help for men and boys. And men make about 40% of victims of domestic abuse now, so almost 50%. That's an issue. And then the more broad issue of Movember, specifically in the UK, is that they have too much money. Lots of money's going in, very little's coming out. They're sitting on a huge mountain of about £50 million. So all those people that are raising money by growing moustaches and doing fun runs and bake sales, often men who die by suicide might leave money in their will and that's donated. They're cashing those checks and they're just putting it into their bank account. There's £50 million to be spent, and that isn't their money. That was money given to them, entrusted to them, so they can go out and help save men's lives, like I'm trying to, and they're not doing it. Not to mention all of our trustees aren't even from the UK. So a charity has trustees. The role of a trustee is to make sure the money is being spent in the most beneficial way to those in that country. And I don't know how a trustee could do that when they don't even live in the UK. They live in America. They don't even live in the continent. So that's not to say they don't do good work. They're also doing some great work more generally in men's health, but I find them quite gutless. I find them too powerful, and I find they're not a UK charity. I feel like they're, to use the word, colonising the UK men's health sector as a foreign entity coming to the UK, pushing aside all the amazing smaller charities that can't compete with the £50 million. And they've steamrolled over it. They brought all this political bullshit with them, all these ideologies around Vogue and, you know, it being a priority. And they're late to the party. They're a guest in this country, and they should remind themselves of that. So rather than being sat at the head of the table, they should be sat to the side. Certainly lend your voice, but remind yourself you're a guest and you were late. So I'd much rather give the microphone to the smaller charities that are doing even more important work but don't get the limelight. So yeah, there's lots to say, but they do good stuff as well. They did a really good report about men's health that found 15 men die young in the UK every single hour. So by the end of this podcast, that's 15 men died young. Most of those can be avoided. And yeah, 1 in 5 men in this country won't even live to 65. So these are the sort of facts they do that are really important research, but it's not all good. But then I guess no one's perfect either.
How possible do you think is that we create a movement as men of healthy masculinity, or whatever you want to call it? Because honestly, whatever your take on feminism is, these women were able to create a movement that benefited them and forced the political class, all of the politicians to do the things for them in the name of doing the right things. And for a long time it has been working very well, and for a long time no people could frankly say anything against it because it was fair enough. And even now that it has gone too far, politicians still stand by it in a sense that they are, doing something good.
Oh, I mean, I think generally what you're saying is right regarding feminism, and absolutely, definitely right in terms of how impressive and effective it has been throughout history. Whether you like or don't like feminism, we all have to agree it's been extremely effective.
Massive influence.
And hats off to the women that have done it, and men as well, but mostly women. That the organisation, the ferocity, the diligence, the hard work, persistence, most of all, incredible work, amazing. It's something we should all learn from. But I also don't want to look at feminism through rose-tinted glasses. Certainly there's big problematic areas now, but there's been problems right back to the start. Even like Emmeline Pankhurst, who is probably the most famous feminist ever, leader of the suffragettes, she was the one that was, getting women's right to vote in 1918. She was also a massive, and this is relevant to you, a massive leader of the white feather movement. You know about that? Order of the white feather?
I've heard it somewhere. But
so it's basically where women, particularly mostly women, would be part of this thing called the Order of the White Feather, and during the war, the First World War, they would go around and give white feathers to men that were not enlisted, to basically say you're a coward and you should go on a list. Basically publicly shaming and humiliating men on the streets. Often men that have been to war and come back and are traumatised, can't even go. Often children, often boys, like 15-year-old boys, 14-year-old boys, getting given a white feather by these privileged white women, the Order of the White Feather. And Emmeline Pankhurst is one of their most prominent members. So as amazing as she is, or was, She was also a horrendous woman who did horrific things, openly shamed men and boys into listing, presumably going to their deaths. And I'm not sure what kind of thing you can say about that. Not to mention the suffragettes were also a terrorist group. They literally killed people. They planted bombs, they set fires, they killed people. I think maybe 5 people died as a result of their explosives. Many more could have died had they not been deactivated. A great little tidbit for you is that the feminist movement and the suffragettes invented the letter bomb. So they invented the letter bomb as a means of getting the political change they wanted, i.e. women's right to vote. It's fair enough. Maybe you do have to break a few eggs to make an omelette. But also, it was men didn't vote either. Like, this idea that men voted and women didn't is not true. That's a historical revision of the world. Most men in 1918 also couldn't vote in this country. And before that, only a tiny percentage of men could vote. So that has all been removed from history. It wasn't just women that won the right to vote as a result of feminism. It was many men too. And the men won their right to vote after the war as basically a gratitude and acknowledgement for the horrors they went through in the trenches. And they were quite right. They said you should have a say in how society's run, what you've sacrificed, and women were brought along as well. So a lot missing from the story. But yeah, I agree. There's a lot to learn from feminism. And I learn from it every day, I think. I mean, as a former feminist myself, I try to hold on to those bits and try to bring along the ferocious, persistent, endless protesting, and they're quite right to protest in many ways.
Well, I think if you go, if we dive into the whole topic of military structure and how in my country men are supposed to fight, men must fight.
Yep.
Women do not have the obligation to fight, and in many countries, men are conscripted, women are not. Certainly, there are countries like Israel where women are also conscripted. How right do you think is that? The whole, as we seem to be moving once again to this society of equality, and everyone can choose which field they want to enter. Everyone can choose who they want to be, regardless of their gender. And I do think this is right. There are still some stereotypes which remain so strong, like women tend to get the custody of children, like men are supposed to fight because they're stronger. So men are stronger here when we're supposed to fight, and men are weaker somewhere else.
It's a bit of a bum deal, isn't it? So women will get the custody.
Selective,
men can go and lose both their legs in a war somewhere. That's a great deal. But yeah, you're right. It's very hypocritical how a lot of feminists just seem to lose their voice when it comes to Ukraine, and where men are being ripped out of cars and homes and off the street and stuffed into vans and taken off the front. I'm like, well, where are the feminists there? How is that fair? Why are we not insisting women are?
And honestly, I don't really want women to fight in Ukraine, because then nobody would take care of the children. Yeah. But it's just the question of fairness is still there.
I don't think they necessarily have to be serving on the front line to be in the military.
No, they can be helping, certainly.
You've got to recognise the fact that I'm 6'2", I weigh 90 kilograms. I don't think most women could drag me out of a war zone if I had my leg blown off. So there has to be an acknowledgement of women's lesser physical capabilities in terms of a frontline capacity. But that doesn't mean they should be absolved of any responsibility whatsoever. I don't think it's right that anyone should be conscripted against their will or their wants. But there are things that are right and there are things that are necessary. And unfortunately, if your country's being invaded by someone like Vladimir Putin, it becomes necessary that we have to conscript people.
I agree.
And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair, but that is necessary. And I don't think it should just be men. I think women should be there too. And not necessarily on a frontline capacity, but certainly in some sort of supportive role. I don't know what that would be, but it doesn't seem right that they can go and the men have to stay.
Where can you also observe those stereotypes influencing the way the world functions now? Maybe somewhere that men are perceived to be something, and therefore maybe being the caregiver, having to work too much, is actually a burden on many men nowadays. Yeah,
I think a lot of fathers want to be at home, part-time parenting, part-time work. Most parents want that. Very few parents want to be full-time anything, either a parent or at work. They want flexibility. And that is an option that is afforded to more mothers and fathers. And there are so many men, fathers, I know them, but also statistically speaking, that are working full time to provide for their family because they have no other choice, but they desperately want to spend more time with their children, and everyone's worse off. So I'd say a greater balance, like especially things like, if you look at the pay gap, for example, the reason why women are paid less, although it's not women, it's mothers, specifically mothers, not women, is because they're at home and they're not working. And if they are working, it's part-time. Whereas the man, after having a child, he goes back to work and works full-time and gets to pay rises and promotions. That means he gets paid more. So there's really great examples of giving fathers more time with their children, less time at work, and encouraging women back into the workplace will benefit women by closing the pay gap. So yes, I think we're resting quite heavily on very antiquated gender roles that assume the mother's the best parent and the father isn't. But it goes way, way beyond that. There's loads of places that we see that. Like in criminal court, for example, in the UK, this is Ministry of Justice data, so from like it's sort of gold star data, they found that in their own research that a man and a woman going to court having committed the same crime with the same criminal background, the man is 88% more likely to be sentenced to prison than the woman. That's not right, and that's because we assume that he's more violent, more dangerous. She's, maybe she was coerced into this, maybe it wasn't her fault, maybe she's a mother. I'm like, maybe, but maybe for him as well. There are loads of men that are criminally exploited, pushed into gangs, commit crimes and are locked up. That isn't right. And I, as a progressive, as someone left wing, I'm a big believer in prison reform. I don't believe in just endless punishment for anyone in prison. I want to rehabilitate people. And Labour have been bringing in many of the policies I wanted to see, changing prison, getting people out that shouldn't be there, looking at traumatic head injuries, people that are there out as a result of exploitation, people that are there as a result of being abused, people that are just not well, shouldn't be there at all, people that are caregivers. But they're only doing that policy for women in prison. So they write this amazing prison reform around getting people out of prison and quite literally closing prisons down, but then only using it for women in prison, who are like 4% of the prison population. So that, again, that's discrimination, and it's resting quite heavily on, again, the antiquated gender roles that assume that a man is inherently bad and deserving of being locked up, whereas a woman in prison, even though she might have committed the same crime and even with the same criminal background, she is somehow lesser, not as guilty. And we see that with gay men as being guilty of being gay. We see it with black men especially. Yeah, it's right across the board. You've just got to look at it. And just generally speaking, I think we just see men's life as less valuable, more disposable. So we see women as precious, men as disposable, and like I guess you'll see it spoken. People say whenever there's a disaster, it's always women and children first. Get the women and children out, and I'm always get the children out for sure, but the women are adults, and yeah, they might need additional help because of they're perhaps less physically able. But ultimately, a woman as an adult, I don't necessarily think her life is more important than a man's. I'd say they're both equally important. But I think there's lots of evidence around what's called male disposability, that is the sexist assumption on a societal and structural level that assumes a man's life is more disposable than a woman's, and it's, like I said, made real for the women and children first, and other such things like that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time for a podcast, and it has been an amazing pleasure to interview you.
Oh, it's pleasure is all mine, and hopefully I'll come back again soon.
And all the good for your work.
Thank you.